That'd be a sexy 90s strip club.
Yeah, a lot of neon.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very 1990s. I love it. Big teased hair and people dancing to Motley Crue. Hello and welcome to the QUACKCAST. This is QUACKCAST number 481. I'm Ozone Ocean and with me is Tance, Baines and Pitt. Hi guys.
Hello.
Hello.
I didn't say pants this time. Yay. I removed...
I said you could leave that as a little pearl for the patrons.
Yes, I removed the pants. So
Remove your pants. The pants.
So in this QUACKCAST number 481, we're talking about historical revisionism, where it's good and where it's bad, because there are good ways and bad ways to use it. It's not all bad and it's not all good. You just have to use it correctly. Too many people mess it up, usually through ignorance. I would say that's usually when people are deliberately using it and knowing why they're using it. They generally use it well. It's when people are ignorant or they just don't care. That's when it's creates issues. This is based on Tance's news post from the 30th, which is yesterday in the actual real time where we're recording on Saturday. And it's a great news post. But before we get into that, I have to bring up the featured comic. This week I featured Crystal Visions, which is a very nice looking sort of steampunk Victorian set fantasy with magic and stuff. So, take it away me with Crystal Vision. Hello, I'm Ozone Ocean, and my feature for the week was Crystal Visions. Crystal heads to the big city for the grim task of officiating at her brother's funeral. She doesn't want to be there, especially not at the behest of the very people he worked for and who he died for. But she steels herself and does her duty. Things don't go smoothly, however. There's an attack in the heart of the big city, and things start to go off the rails. She meets a very important person there, and her adventure really begins. There's magic and alchemy in this 19th century style fantasy world. There's politics and dark doings as well. The art is pencil and watercolour. It's dreamy and soft. This is a very nice looking comic. You could even say it's, I suppose, steampunk fantasy. Steampunk, yeah, that's a good description of it because of the 19th century setting. So, yeah, this is a pretty cool looking comic. Yeah, very, actual watercolour. It looks like it's been used to illustrate it. Watercolour and pen, with a bit of digital stuff to do the speech balloons and stuff like that. So it's very good looking comic, very unique looking, quite an original look, very pleasant. And the story is intriguing, as you're watching it develop with this woman and her making powerful connections. And possibly, using her magic offensively. We'll have a look and see. Anyway, so this comic is by Roma, and it's rated E. So, for everyone to look at. Alright. Have a read of Crystal Visions. And that was the featured comic, Crystal Visions. Okay, so next up we have the theme music that Gumwallis has given us. And this week he's given us a theme to Warcraft Light Reaver. So Warcraft. Now this sounds a bit like a comic based on World of Warcraft, and you'd probably be right there. So this comic, it's based on that, but the music is grey, forbidding walls of solid granite rise high into the dark skies. Sounds of heavy doom echo from the far winds, booming with the thunder of an inevitable, inescapable despair of a world bathed in shadow and war. So, take it away, Gumwallis with Warcraft Light Reaver. And that was Warcraft Light Reaver by Gumwallace. Well, Gumwallace is doing the music. The comic is done by the Light Reaver team, and it's rated M. And it's worth a look because the art is really cool.
Great art, yeah.
Great arts.
So let's, and it's not 3D, yeah. So it's based on Warcraft, but it's not a 3D comic, which is unusual. It's drawn. All right, so let's get into this topic. So it's based on the idea of historical revisionism. Like a Chance, do you want to take the lead? Take point.
Are you sure? I might just monopolize everything.
Oh,
Okay.
you're afraid of ranting? Well, I could.
I might rant. Okay, I might rant a little bit, just a little bit. I'll tone it down, I promise.
Okay.
So anyway, the main premise.
Just before you get into that, I just want to say, like, and a good example of historical revisionism to me, like, I just don't want to forget it, is that women wearing corsets. Now, this is a huge thing in the historical reenactment community and costuming community, that they get really pissed off. Because in films, like in 90% of historical films, the women always go, "Oh my God, this corset is so tight. It's awful that we as women have to be restricted with our corsets and it's messing up our bodies. And oh, it's such a relief." And like women who wear corsets, historical corsets, know the fact that corsets aren't an overly restrictive thing and they don't hurt and they don't give them back problems or, abortions or fainting or anything like that. This is based on a particular set of myths and culture from the 1800s, actually. It was like in the 19th century, but it was like, it's one of these, it's like, it's based on bad science, and it wasn't really a big belief back then. This was like a fringe belief, and it came to be in the 20th century, everyone believes this, and it's a false idea of history. It's historical revisionism to have every woman,
I think it was perpetuated by actresses as well, modern actresses who like wear corsets for historical roles, and they're like, "Oh, it was so uncomfortable and stuff," and like, well, they're probably not wearing it correctly. What's her name? She's Polish. Carolina.
Carolina. I'll find her.
Yeah, I don't know how to say her last name. She's a historical fashion expert. She's on YouTube, but she did it. I love her videos. She's amazing, by the way. But she did a great video on this and about where a lot of these myths came from, and not only that, but how the history of the corset and how it changes over the years, and what it is and how it played a part in fashion. And, like, for instance, you don't just wear it straight against the skin, you're not supposed to do that. And like, anyways, it's for realistic takes on a corset. Check out her videos. It's really cool. But yeah, she does talk about that quite a lot.
Yeah, she's a great source for like a practical examination of history. A living history. So yeah, we'll have to get a link to that. Anyway, sorry, Tance, that was just something I remembered, and it was a good example of that historical revision.
A great segue into the whole historical revisionism thing and the problem behind it, because it illustrates it really, really well. And the point that I was generally trying to make was that if you are creating a story that is packaged as historical fiction, and you don't do your research well and thoroughly to actually depict the era as faithfully as possible, and you construct a good enough story that people are immersed into it and they believe that what they see is the correct version of the era, when it isn't actually, then you are teaching them wrong messages about how that era was and how people conducted themselves at the time, and the different comparisons between the now and the then. Like, for example, with the corset that you said, corsets wear at least basically like shoes. So of course, if you got to wear one of our, I don't know, sneakers or something that we say are very comfortable and they were 3 sizes too small for you, it would be agony. And you would say that we practiced some kind of vulgar, I don't know, constriction of the feet while exercising. And it would be a mystery how we did it and stuff like that. So the idea was that in reality, most of the people wearing corsets were wearing them more or less like we wear them today, in the sense that they used to be supportive of the body and of the garments that they were wearing, more or less. And they were very much fitted to be custom made to the person wearing the corset. It was for them, and they were broken in, more or less like ballet shoes or something like that. So if you don't depict that accurately in your historical piece, then you give the impression that people somehow practiced something impractical for several centuries.
And not only is it teaching the wrong thing to people who don't know better, but to those who do, it just looks silly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially if it's meant to make some big point in your story or something, then it's going to make that point you're trying to make, or that scene that's supposed to be really great, fall flat.
Exactly. And the problem, this is the main problem, and the other, of course, is that people that do know how it was supposed to be will be thrown out of the story. They will lose suspension of disbelief, and you will lose them.
Yeah,
and engagement to the story.
You create a world that is illogical because, like you said, like they wouldn't have keeping on being wearing them for, you know, a couple of 100 years. And then like the hand waving kind of way of like justifying it, saying, oh, but oppression of women, they were oppressed. And you think, well, yeah, but you can't oppress people in that way. It wouldn't work. You know, you can't oppress people like by physically torturing them for generations and generations and not have them change. That then they would be like you're thinking of them as morons or like mentally deficient because there wasn't that, you know, you're thinking of them as being less intelligent than women now. That's a real disservice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Please go on.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that gets to really bother me when talking to people about the past, because it lacks critical analysis, and that really gets under my skin. Now what's great is that we have been re-examining the past and finding, hey, it has been more oppressive in a lot of ways, in a lot of deep ways towards many people than we previously believed. And that's really important to know. But to broad stroke everything, and like, I hate when I'm talking to somebody about something and they go, well, this person probably thought that because everybody was racist back then, or everybody, I wouldn't argue that they typically weren't. But when you broad stroke issues, topics that are worth talking about and dissecting in that simpler way, that just stops the conversation. Like for instance, talking about corsets, like we just were. I don't know, then that loses my interest.
Exactly. And actually, that's a very good point, because it explains another element of historical revisionism, in that because we have, and this is a bias that exists in general, Pitface, as an archaeologist, will know that a lot better than me, is that we tend to think that we are the more enlightened version of all the previous eras. And so we are the more intelligent, we are the more logical, and we are the best possible version in intelligence, in ethics, in what have you, compared to people of previous eras. So whatever they thought, the logic that they had, the approach to the cosmos and stuff is inferior to what we have now. So it is more interesting to just project our stuff on and make it interesting, make it engaging, because no way we would be able to be engaged with the approach that was the thing in the 1200s or in the 200s or in the BC era, which is, of course, a great myth and a disservice to a lot of enlightened people of the past to whom we owe where we are now. And the heretic, shocking premise that there were some things in the past that are better than they are today, perchance, in certain ways. So, and one last thing I wanted to say is that we also tend to generalize something that sounds exotic and weird and extreme as something that was practiced by everyone, because the whole very, very tight corset thing was only done with the practice within the tight lacing community, who were supposed to be kind of weirdo fashionistas, hipsters people of the time. Usually, I would say also like middle and upper classes, because they had the luxury to do that and just tight lace and stuff. But that is just a very small portion of the female population.
Yeah, it's like today, like people who use plastic surgery or can afford, personal trainers to make themselves look a particular way. It's a segment of society. Back then they also used photography in order to fake being, having tiny waists, in that people would have themselves, a photo taken and then they just black out the edges of their bodies, or you'd get a corset with the edges blacked out already. And so it was a lot of fakery.
Absolutely.
Or
there's also like, this isn't so much to do with like corsets and stuff, and I should try not to get too much off the mark, but since this is supposed to be about
Stark original,
writing and stuff, but I think this is a good start to base where we're kind of basing our ideas from. But another thing that kind of gets under my skin is the idea that medieval people didn't bathe. And I think what that idea comes from is like, oh, did they have a bathtub in their house? Oh, they didn't bathe. Well, they got rivers and shit. Like, you think they weren't going and taking a dip in the river? Like, they bathed. That's bathing. Like, to say just because they didn't have a bathtub per se or something like that, that they had the luxury of soaking in and filling up, all the time, doesn't mean that they weren't bathing themselves. The basic animals bathe themselves, like.
Exactly, and they did have barrels or big tubs that were made of, like they looked like barrels. They did have bathing apparatuses. Let's say.
Yeah.
The apparatus.
Yeah. You don't even need an apparatus. You it's just I don't know, these preconceived notions that, like you were saying, and I just hate those ideas, especially now, because it leads to shit like Ancient Aliens and these things that in their extreme discredit people before us as if they couldn't have possibly have had the culture, the technology, just this stupid ethnocentric civilization idea heavy concepts that people just back then were just smacking rocks together and weren't good enough. It just makes me so fucking angry. I can't even function.
Exactly. That's horrible. And also that you don't. I feel that as a creator, if you're going to bring to life a particular area, you should at least have the decency, the courtesy to get your headspace into their headspace as much as you can, because there is a limit to what we can know and be aware of about different eras. But at least take the trouble to get into the whole logic and the idea and how people would react, because that again is going to affect your plot. Like, for example, and I'm not going to go even all the way back to antiquity and Stargate stuff, but if you have a 1950s Greek village, like the one I described, like the series I described in my article, and you base your plot point on the unmarried young women that are of marriageable age going into the village coffee house, which was traditionally and up until the 70s, and a completely, absolutely male territory. Women they simply did not get in there. It was, if a woman that was not married and looking for her husband, because if she was married and just went in there to have her coffee, she still would be in trouble. Even worse, if she was unmarried, she would be conceived as soliciting or looking for some kind of dirty, hanky-panky business in general, or being promiscuous. And that is a very, very big issue, because you cannot have your plot point being the woman happens to want to go to have coffee at the coffee house of the village, and that's where she overhears certain things that she needs to overhear for the plot to progress, because that would never happen. You would need to get you to be aware in some different way. So the plot will be affected by the era and the norms of the era. So,
or even like if they would have, I'm sorry, Ken.
No, go on.
Like, even if they would have gone about having her go into the coffee shop, they could have maybe then acknowledged that by having it, by changing how it happens somehow. What if it was going to be a funny story? Not that this is that funny anymore, but like, you know, maybe have her dress up as a man, or, you know, or maybe she pays off somebody else to go in there and listen for her, you know, or, and that in turn can create some more interesting things down the line. Like if she pays this person off, or if she's going to pay this person off and maybe doesn't or forgets to, and it comes back to bite her somehow, or so, just like these little ideas that could, that taking account of this nuance could have created something more interesting instead of just ignoring it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember, for example, and this is like a family story. My grandparents were very much in love before they were married. So my grandma, when they were engaged, she was, let's say, willing to explore the relationship a little more. And we're talking, they were already engaged, and that when a couple in Greece was engaged, there were certain liberties that could be taken, because it was considered basically a marriage contract itself, just one that can be dissolved a little bit easier than actual marriage, but it was very, very official, legitimate stuff. So certain liberties were more, let's say, allowed, and my grandma wanted to explore that, and we're talking about 50s again. And my grandfather would not do it, and his reasoning was that if something happens to me before we get married, you have a risk, a social risk of being in trouble if I die before we get married. And she was very frustrated, and they had yeah, and needless
So
to say,
that's a
when they got
great
married.
story, you know, like
Yeah,
that could be
that's
a great, yeah.
yeah, and actually I do plan to incorporate it in without moonlight for post-war stuff. Because during the war there were different norms. But the idea was, yeah, uh, needless to say, after they got married, there were other things that took place with abandon. So anyway, the idea was though that although he really wanted her, because he was so concerned about her and he actually loved her as a person, he wanted to protect her from the social backlash that might have happened even though they were engaged. Imagine if they were not even engaged. So
Right.
that's something that you cannot just wave away when you write a story about that particular era in Greece. Just it's not appropriate, let's say,
Yeah.
in my
I mean,
opinion.
even more than that, like it's gold, you know. If you know that stuff and you have those actual details, how much more interesting is that in a piece of fiction than just
Exactly.
Yeah,
yeah.
it's more interesting to know about the differences between us and them rather than just pretending everything was always the same. Supplanting modern culture directly onto the past is sometimes interesting, but is when it's done thoughtlessly, it's quite lame. Like historical revisionism, we've been covering the bad parts, but it's when it's done deliberately, it can be really cool. And like say A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger, it's not really my favorite film, but a lot of people love it, and
I really love
it's obvious, like just cutting and pasting modern culture directly on the past, and it makes for a fun, interesting story. But it's not pretending that is how it was. There's all sorts of deliberate pointers, like there's Queen played, all kinds of modern rock music and stuff like that. They're doing modern dances, and it's deliberate and it's obvious, and that means it's not confusing, and it's not only is it not confusing, or it's you look at it and you think, well, yeah, that's obviously modern stuff. It's obviously done for a reason. That's fine. I'm going to just sit back and suspend disbelief and enjoy this, and that's done
exactly.
well.
And it's like a different kind of spice and an exploration to like what would happen if we fuse this era with that era, and let's see what comes out of it. And that's fun, and that's creativity, and doesn't have to do with an attempt to accurately portray the past and teach, because whether we like it or not, a story always teaches stuff.
Yeah, you do that for... Oh, go on, sorry. I was going to just butt in there.
No, you go on.
I was going to say you do that for particular reasons. Say, in there, you're sort of just examining like this like a class culture that's happening between this peasant and how he becomes a knight. And you're making the audience identify with him and his rise to, becoming gentry through that. And another film that does that was that Marie Antoinette film. I can't remember what it was called, with Kirsten Dunst. Sorry?
The one with Claire Danes.
It was Claire Danes, was it? It's Marie Antoinette. And so the whole story of Marie Antoinette was that she was this young, naive woman, basically not forced, but sort of dragooned into marrying, Louis the 16th, Louis the 18th. Jesus Christ! Sorry, guys. Marrying the king that ends up getting his head chopped off anyway in the French Revolution. But so she's this young, naive woman, married into this incredibly wealthy monarchy, in this troubled time in history. And in the film, they've characterized her as like a very modern style young woman, in order to help the audience understand the kind of woman she was and the kind of social situation she's in. So, she's a very fickle kind of lady, and she's used to a certain way of life, and she finds it very stuffy there, and she rebels against that by buying all these shoes and having all these sweets made and all that kind of stuff. But it's not really so it evokes an idea of modernity, and helps you realize more strongly that this woman had trouble fitting into this new world. She was a fish out of water in the French court. So it works in that way. I think the most famous scene there is they play the bow wow wow, I want candy, when she's looking at new shoes and food and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of people don't like that, because that's just placing modernity over the top of this very 18th century kind of 19th century image. But it also works.
I think that the reason this worked was that the characterization side, which is another thing that I would like to address, the events of the story and the demands placed on the role of the queen, and the way the history progressed, as far as I remember at least, was decently faithful to reality in many ways. So that makes you have the quote-unquote modern elements pass along with the package, because they do not completely work the era. And that's the other thing. Although people had different like philosophies and approaches and beliefs and whatever, they still were people like we are today. So the reactions, the personalities, even the ambition or the wishes are still there. The difference would be that they manifest in different ways. They want to achieve things from different paths. And an example I'd like to give would be like from medieval Greece, and I'm saying medieval like after the Byzantine, during the Ottoman times. So the women would be very sequestered and very have very specific roles: mothers, wives, supporting the household, being very much the second fiddle to the husband, let's say, okay, among other things. However, this is a quote that I think might have made its way to movies elsewhere. There was this saying that still goes around, that the man is the head, but the woman is the neck. And the idea was that the neck turns the head wherever the neck wants. So the idea was that the woman was the actual leader of the household, because she is the one that controls absolutely everything, as the neck in the body of the family. Whereas the head is, of course, very important, but still very much dependent on its base. So the idea, what would that idea be? That a very ambitious woman can still pursue her ambitions, but she has to do it through that logic and through manipulating, if you like, or cooperating if they have a better relationship, the husband or the man within the house. And that actually happened a lot, especially in Greek society, to the point that matrons were feared by the men a lot. Like they didn't want to anger them, and there are many anecdotes about that. The big captains of the revolution would sort of cower and retreat really quickly when the mother came out and was pissed about something and stuff like that. So there you go.
Yeah, it's quite famous actually. Like, there's the common idea is like, okay, so women always played second fiddle in history to men. That's the common idea. But when you actually just look in, even in a very like superficial extent, you don't have to look very far. There's like in Roman history, in Greek history, in medieval history, there's all these super powerful women who had like slightly background roles, but they're only background because the history focuses on the man, whereas they had just as much power really, but from a different, or more, from a different way. You know, there's all these mothers and wives and things like that controlled things. And, you know, you read about, oh, this person was cowed by the mother, or like the Dowager Empress or something like that. They had to ask advice. This is in China. This is in Japan. This is in, you know, medieval France. This is in, ancient Greek. This is everywhere, you know. They had, like, you know, Alexander the Great's mother, for example. You know, she had gigantic power even before Alexander was born. You know, this is not hidden history. This is not revisionism. This is reality. But people just overlook it for some reason because, the man went and he was a general in war. And people have this false idea that people winning wars actually changed history. No, wars were just a small aspect of life. And there are like little pinpoints in history. What about all the stuff that was going on around the war, before it and after it? And, you know, back home and stuff like that. It's not because it doesn't exist. It's because it was, you know, just not focused upon by people. But, you know, that was there. And if you read carefully histories, it's all there. You know, women have always had a significant role in history. Yeah. So if you want to portray like women as having, you know, being powerful women, you don't have to like get your male characters and turn them into women. You can just look at history in a more intelligent way. I mean, sure, it's fun to have active characters, and yes, there were historical women warriors, but that wasn't the only way you could exercise power.
Yeah.
So that's a thing, but that's a bit of more of a rant, I suppose. But, yeah.
No, you're 100% correct. I really like that you brought that up, and it calls back to the point you made earlier. I had really liked it when you mentioned this, that people find ways to have power. I think you more or less kind of said that. And granted, that's not to say that there weren't oppressive systems in place. Absolutely, 100 million %. But the way people are, if you write them as if they're content to be led around without any kind of control over their own lives, or you're to have control, or even like little ways, even if it's not taking the system back, little ways that they find to cope and have control of their own lives that might, you know, be sneaky or even just little things, then you're doing a disservice to your characters. Something I'd love to see, because I've been thinking about this quite a lot lately. The old way of thinking about, which is actually still quite recent and is just starting to be more questioned, I think. The old way of thinking of like, Paleolithic man is the hunter-gatherer and the woman always stayed home with the child and like stuff like that is starting to be turned on its head. You know, they have found women who have been buried with like flint knapping kits and stuff like that, which now granted burials, it's the same thing with if you find a woman who's been buried with a sword or something, it doesn't mean that they were a warrior in life. But digressing, I would love to see something. Maybe I'll do this myself. I might be able to in this story coming up. But I'd like to see something that takes a Paleolithic woman and shows that she knows how to flint knap. She can hunt. She, you know, especially if she's, you know, doesn't come equipped with this man with her for her whole life or something, and a baby suckling at her breast, you know, like, no, they could survive. They had to survive, which means that they had skills and shit that we're not giving them credit for. And I'd love to see things like that taken, you know, considered more. That's empowerment.
Exactly. And the other thing is that there were a lot of women, granted, not the majority, but there were a lot of women throughout history that flouted the social norms, and they broke the social norms, and they did their own thing, and they did it successfully. From, I don't know, Hatshepsut, who became a pharaoh and not a queen. That was big.
She had huge building works too, which means that she had great control over resources.
Exactly. And she reigned supreme. Like, she had to die for them to launch an attack on her, which means a lot. Okay. So from as far as back as ancient Egypt to today, just show how this happened without making it seem like it was okay for women, for example, and not just women, I mean any kind. I'll also give an example from ancient Korean society that involves men, because there was also male oppression, not only female oppression. Anyway, show how it was hard to do, and it was not the norm, so that you can also learn about the era and see why this person was actually very special. And I'm thinking, like, the first female doctor in Greece was, she lived around 1910. She was the first one, and I think she became a microbiologist at the time, which was very, very hard and everything. And she had a diary, I think, or she wrote memoirs. I don't remember very well, but she gave an account of how every time she walked into the auditorium in the university, she faced constant jeering by all the other male students, telling her to go to her kitchen, telling her to go have babies, telling her all sorts of weird and unacceptable things. And she just pushed forward and did certain things in order to assert herself as their equal, and when they stopped. But she says how she did it and how hard it was to achieve. It wasn't just, oh, we have a girl in the class, let's all celebrate her.
I've arrived and now my problems are solved.
Yes. No.
Or there's one evil man who's against her, and everybody else is secretly for her and cheering her on.
Yes, and everyone falls in love with her, and absolutely everyone admires her as a pioneer of her kind. And I'm saying it on purpose like that. So there's that. Or for example, if you take a Korean society of the Joseon period that was sort of medieval towards modernity, I guess. So around 1400s, somewhere there. You had an entire class of people, the butchers, that were considered unclean, more or less like the executioners, I guess, in the West, where they didn't even have names. They were executed if they even talked badly to anyone else above them, all the other social classes, and all sorts of other things. Like, anyone could murder them and it would be fine, because they were not considered actual people, although they were very necessary for society, because they were the only ones that actually butchered the cows and other animals and, produced the meat. So there is this real story. It's a real historical person who managed to break caste. And that's something that was unthinkable at the time. There was no social mobility. You were born in a particular caste, you stayed there. So he managed to break that caste and become a doctor, and actually a very renowned doctor. But that happened through all kinds of shit. And I cannot say it in any different manner because he lost a lot more than he gained for like half of his life or 2/3 of his life before he became accepted and acknowledged. And he was considered the exception, not the rule. So that didn't mean that all the other butchers benefited from this, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And we're talking now about the man, all right? So acknowledge the ugly because the ugly shows us the good that we have now and also the amazing strength of the people that could go around that or go through that, depending on who they were.
Yeah,
So,
often it's a story less of oppression so much. I mean, oppression is a good way to characterize it, but it's restriction. People are restricted to their caste, but they cannot change their roles in society. You know, that's why, like women were, like a famous the playwright, we discussed him I think last week or the week before, Ibsen, with Doll's House, Ghosts, Hedda Gabler, all that kind of thing. So he's got this character like in the Doll's House, who's sort of railing against her position in society and how she can't do the things that men do. And the fact is that it's not just because she's a woman, it's because it's a restrictive society in 19th century Scandinavia, and she is unable to move outside of the social situation in which she's stuck. And men have a little bit more freedom, but everybody in those societies was sort of stuck within the bonds of their social roles, and they couldn't really move outside of them very easily. And that's that world, and that's a good way of understanding it. And if you're doing characters, you're having characters who, yes, a terrible husband, but if you have characters who are easily able to transgress, then you're totally misunderstanding and misrepresenting that world, because that world was all about people being stuck in these social situations. It was so hard. And if something was bad, particularly bad in that social situation, like the Doll's House character Nora, I think is her name, if something's really bad, then they can't get out of that situation because they're stuck by the pressures of their society at the time. And that makes for a really interesting story, but it also makes for understanding that society a lot better. So yeah, that's an important thing to have.
And I think when writing about historical fiction, I mean, of course, it can be daunting to try to understand a world that really existed, but that you personally have never been a part of. That can be daunting. But I think if you're going to embark upon it, a good way to get an understanding, especially of specific people's and thought processes and stuff like that, is not only to learn about the culture itself as best as you can, and the different facets that were working in it, but also, if they're available, try to find some memoirs from the era. Memoirs, journals, stuff like that. Accounts, personal accounts from people who were living through specific times and situations, because those specific accounts will give you nuances. There's this one book that I really like. And it's not fiction, but I bring it up because it gave me an insight to a facet of somebody's life that, had I not have read it, I would have had no idea what it would have been like. But it's called Coffin Man. I forgot who wrote it. Oh, I'll have to look it up after the cast. But it was written by a Japanese man, I think, in the early 20th century, I think. And he was a mortician, which, much like the butcher role and the executioner's role, was somebody who was necessary to society but was marginalized for the work that they did. And what Coffin Man is about is it's this specific this specific undertaker, Japanese undertaker's perspective of the time, of how although he had to live with this sort of outcast standing, how he came to terms with it and still found the beauty in what he did.
The sound is off.
Pit is still talking to us, people, but the sound has stopped for her, so she's going to come back
and continue, because that was fascinating.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, that was an interesting point about the Coffin Man. These are hidden aspects of history that you don't really get them unless you read memoirs and things, because we always go off a common view of this stuff, and we don't often get the intricacies, so it's important to read about that.
Like someone who actually was living it. Let's see, she's back.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Well,
continue with what you were saying, because it was
well, where did it cut off?
He found
the last thing. Because go ahead.
The beauty.
Oh, well, yeah, that was basically it. He found the beauty in the work that he was doing. He found the beauty in death and the beauty in his relation to it, and through his faith, through Buddhism, he found, he was able to cope with things a lot. And by the end of it, it's not like he has overturned society or anything like that. He's still an outcast, but he's able to live in a way that he can deal with that. And I don't know, just insights like that are really important if you're going to be writing any kind of story. Not only that, but they can be so fascinating to learn about, and really offer something important for your story.
Yeah, and it can give us insights about ourselves and our current state of existence, if you like, because all of these things that were in the past, within our cultures at least, and even more so now that there is a lot more connectivity, more direct, let's say, because there was also in the past between different countries, different cultures and stuff. All of these things inform our collective unconscious and inform the way we react to things and how we understand the cosmos, if you like. So,
well, they're embedded in our family histories too. That's something we don't often realize. Our grandmothers and grandfathers experienced the world in that way, and great-grandfathers and so on. And in order to understand them better and, their way of life, it helps to acknowledge, those realities and not sort of pretend our current reality and way of thinking has always been how people thought about the world. And,
Yeah, and just another mention, we actually talked a little bit about this before we started recording, is that if you give a warped impression of how things were in the past or how cultures work, then you do a disservice to that culture as well. And I'm thinking of a really bad example, an example of bad revisionist history, which is Pocahontas. Which is terrible. Just as Inglourious Basterds was done really well, and I would say even tastefully, considering the subject matter and the where it branches off from actual history to the alternate history. Pocahontas is terrible because it portrays. I mean, I was, and I still cannot pretend to know indigenous Native American cultures as well. I mean, I haven't really studied it beyond certain things. But back then, when I saw it, it felt very, very false, because you had basically what you had was the white man's perception of the noble savage, and you had everyone be super connected with nature.
Pacing on the wind, and talking to the trees, and like, oh.
Yeah, exactly. And
Avatar.
yeah, but Avatar I can understand and I can actually enjoy it, because it doesn't pretend, you know, that it is a thinly veiled analogy of the Native Americans and stuff, but still, officially, it's an alien race and they can be whatever the hell they like, and that's fine. But when you represent an actual historical person and a specific reality, which is you have two cultures that are alien to each other, clashing, and one is technologically superior in certain ways. That doesn't mean culturally superior, just technologically superior. It has certain advantages when it comes to confronting the other culture. That you have to be very, very careful of how you depict one versus the other.
Yeah, and they all have their own ideas and stuff like that. And the thing, so Lindsay Ellis does a really great video essay about the pratfalls of Pocahontas, and one of the great things that she brings up,
pitfalls, I should
and
say,
why it is
rather than pratfalls. Sorry,
what?
it's pitfalls.
Are you being cheeky?
No, pratfalls
Okay.
means comedic.
Oh yeah, pitfalls. Yes. Sorry. Yeah, there was nothing comedic about it. Thank you, Oz. Thank you. Those Pocahontas pratfalls, you know. Thank you. Well, I learned something today. But what she talked about in her video essay is how, yeah, the movie's message was that, there were both groups just had misunderstandings. One thought the other was savage, and the other thought the other was savage, and then they got in a fight, and they found they weren't so different after all, and it was one person that was causing the problem, when that was not what was going on. That was not the story. That was not the historical circumstance. Which means that it's problematic. I'm trying not to do the thing. I'm trying not to do the thing.
Just imagine that the first exposure a kid has to that particular era and its realities is Pocahontas from Disney.
Yeah.
What they about how things progressed. Oh, okay. And then they all kissed and made up, and they put in jail the funny man with the funny dress, and everything was fine, which is, of course, not. And the problem, and the even I would say even the tragedy of it is that the premise that both cultures considered the other savage is a good one, because that actually happens a lot when you have cultural classes. And people...
But to end it there is problematic, because there was nuance to it. And in the end, there was an aggressor, and there were terrible things that were going on, and it wasn't, and I'm not saying this to you, Tanya, I'm just saying in general, like,
yeah.
To end the conversation at that and say everybody was wrong is a complete broad brushing of history, which has no nuance. It has nothing interesting to say, and I don't care for it.
Yeah.
You have invaders.
Honestly, the thing would be, if you want to explore this notion that within all the other issues, different cultures conceive of each other as savage or below or inferior or what have you, then you should pick you should pick a plot that is designed to showcase that without elements of we have invaders at our shores and they are basically a really big issue and we have to see what we're going to do about it. On the one hand, and the other hand is we have this new land and we have to clear whoever it is there because we want to actually own it. So there are other motivations that are completely glossed over, let's say. If you want to explore the different points of view that come from different cultures, then you should actually pay more attention to character-driven elements. Like, for example, you could have one person getting to know the culture of the other, and then if you have the guts, for example, I'm thinking of the conquistadors that went and stayed with, I don't remember if it was actually Montezuma or someone like that, the king of the Aztecs at the time, and he actually did everything he could to get them to know and familiarize themselves with the Aztec culture. But all they did was pick and choose through his tour, let's say, of the culture throughout a year or so that they stayed there, to reaffirm their belief that he and his people were savages and deserved to be put to death, basically. So the point I want to make is that it's very much it is offensive to display an era as if it is like a great big misunderstanding and everyone is going to be okay after, I don't know, you get a good therapist and do couples therapy or something like that. So,
yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I went on a tangent on that one, but it's very, very important.
History is nuanced, and there's a lot of ways of approaching it. And yeah, sometimes supplanting modern ideas on there is a great one, but should not be done thoughtlessly. It has to be done carefully. Shouldn't just do it willy-nilly and just for the fun of it.
And on the other hand, like you may not want to do something like that, which is totally fine and respectable, in the sense that, for example, I like 300. I really do, but it really has nothing to do with actual Thermopylae and how Spartans fought and nothing. You know that this is a vision with a lot of creative liberties taken from a comic book, and that's fine. But they do not pretend to be historically accurate. They are just telling a larger-than-life, fun story with a lot of atmosphere about it, and that's all there is to it, and that's fine.
Oh, but that even has caused a problem. I mean, we say it's fine, but you even go to Greece. You go walk in the Plaka and you look for souvenirs. You look for souvenirs of Corinthian helmets, and you'll come across the movie helmets from the 300, and that is one of the majority helmets, like the tourist things you'll buy, and it has nothing to do with ancient Greece. This are movie souvenirs, and they're being sold in Athens. And this is one of the things, like in iconography, when people say, like the American college system, it's based on the they call them Greeks. People are like Phi, Kappa, Delta, whatever, and like anyone who's called Spartans now has the symbol of the Spartan helmet from the movie, and that iconography has replaced the real Corinthian helmet in depictions of anything to do with ancient Greece. It's now that stupid movie helmet has taken over. So even that, which is like deliberately fun and deliberately silly, has a negative influence. Now people think that actual Spartans look like that. So that is a common thing.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. Probably there are some people that believe that the ancient Spartans went to war in their underwear. But uh, I think that at least because it says based on Frank Miller, right? I think.
Yeah.
Frank Miller, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this says based on Frank Miller's work. It doesn't say based on Herodotus or
Oh
something
no!
like
But
that.
say if you do a search for Spartans, that is an image that will come up now, like a Goog, like because we
Okay.
get our reality from the internet and we get our reality from image searches and stuff like that.
Yes.
That's what you're
If
going to
you
see.
go to the Spartans, you will get the actual iconography. What I'm saying is that at least it offers like a stimulus and some interest for people to research a little more. And it does not pretend to be a depiction of reality. So in a way, I guess it also gives a bit of responsibility to the audience to keep that in mind that this is not actually real. I don't think after a while, I mean, the audience should be at least a little bit aware when someone is saying based on Frank Miller, it's based on Frank Miller, guys. It's not actually based, on history. So, yeah, what I'm saying is that revisionist, historically inspired stuff should at least be marked that it is inspired by history, not actually depicting history. It's not historical. That's a difference. And yeah, okay. If you are not really interested, then yes, you will remember that the Spartans kicked people into wells and everyone wore capes, and they broke rank when they fought, and they all had red briefs. But that's fine, because if you are actually interested to see how a Spartan warrior looked like, it's very easy to find. Whereas to find the nuance in Pocahontas is a little harder, especially if you believe that you know how it was because you have seen the cartoon or whatever else. That's all I'm saying.
Another famous movie that creates an artificial view of history. Braveheart, of course, is a famous one. Scots didn't wear kilts at that stage. They didn't wear tartan either. Long swords didn't exist.
The queen was very young at the time.
What's that?
The particular queen that falls in love with Braveheart actually was a girl at 9 years old at the time or something. So there's also that.
Well, that's more like, I suppose that's just more taking liberties with history, and that it's not. It does make a whole lot of like horrible ahistorical like dog turds in that film, but I think it probably still gets a pass because it's creating an impression of a heroic last stand, and that's the thing, and that's what it does, and it communicates that to the audience, like Scots standing against the English, and their hero, which is this Braveheart guy. That's what it's doing, and even though it gets everything like it's just a fantasy movie, it's Lord of the Rings basically, but its whole purpose is just to show him being heroic and the Scots standing against the English, and it does that. So I suppose that's why it gets a pass.
I don't know. In my book, it does not get a pass because it presents itself as historical. That this was actually the historical reality. At least to me, that's how it comes across. And honestly, you had a lot of last stands with the Scots against the English that were amazing. And if you wanted to display that, if you wanted to have this amazing story about how Scottish people stuck it to the English, why don't you depict what was the battle at Hastings? I think I don't remember. It was there was this amazing battle that happened and brought the victory to the Scottish people because they knew the terrain much better than the English, and they used the marshland that they knew would be devastating for the cavalry and all the other stuff, and the hoplites and stuff. Not the hoplites, I don't know. The
Knights.
that's not no the infantrymen, let's say.
All right. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. The yeah. Later version of hoplites, I suppose.
Well, they are not really. Sorry, guys. So they wouldn't be able to fight as well, whereas they knew which paths to follow, not to sink into the mud, and then they basically butchered the English. So you could have that if you want to display last stands, or even if you want to display a last stand where they lose the battle. There are. Why warp history to have this very stereotypical, non-nuanced version of Scotland, whereas you can have a lot more flavor, let's say, if you depict the actual stuff, or at least pick an era where they actually wore kilts. That would also be a thing.
I tend to think of it a bit like a Rob Liefeld drawing, in that everybody it was fashionable to hate Rob Liefeld for a long time because his characters have their tiny feet, and there's 6 million pouches on every limb, and they're grins with 7,000 teeth in their faces, and I don't know, feet, or mass gigantic guns, huge shoulder pads. He has these very silly tropes in his drawings, but if you look at the drawings as a portrayal of reality, of course it's stupid, not real. But if you look at them as a symbol of aggression, or a symbol of a soldier character who is prepared for war, then the huge giant gun is just a metaphor for his martial intent. And all the pouches are a metaphor for the tactical superiority of the character. They're not meant to be taken literally. So in some respects, an incorrect portrayal of history can be seen in that way. It can be seen as being a he doesn't profess that he's portraying something historical. I'm relating this to a historical portrayal.
The value of symbolism, in a sense, or
exactly
the way we use visual clues to fill in.
Yeah, you don't take it literally. You take it as a symbol of the thing. The whole Frank Miller thing. The 300. The better way to take it is to take it these symbolically represent his idea of Spartans, and
and his idea of the Persians too, because I mean they're two. It's very much in the comic book style of these are good guys, these are bad guys. Whereas if it would have been depicted off of Herodotus, there's a far vaster story that is not so that's not demeaning to the Persians. It's not demeaning to the other. Herodotus portrays both sides as how they ended up coming to this point in history, and but that's not the story being told with 300. This is a different story, so different visual clues, right? I'm sorry, I think I cut you off.
No, not at all. No, you didn't cut me off. You're basically making my point a lot more interesting.
And that's the beauty of historically inspired stuff versus actual historical stuff. That's the point is that know what you want to do with your story, and don't pretend to do something that you are not doing. Let's say
know what you want to do. That's a good point. Just don't run at it without knowing what you want to do and why you want to do it.
exactly. Like, for example, um, if you take, and I go back to Pocahontas because it's such a gem of a good example of bad stuff. If you compare all the other Disney princesses that are supposedly living in some kind of historical era, nobody fact checks Snow White or Rapunzel or I don't know who else, Cinderella.
Cinderella, yeah.
Yeah, and nobody
Brave,
cares. Why?
Frozen.
Yeah, because they are fairy tales. They are not supposed. Their purpose is completely different. They are not there to depict an actual historical era. They're there to give you a very schematic representation of king, queen, castle, forest, long dresses, beautiful ladies, whatever.
Mhm.
And that's what there is to it. It could take place pretty much during any era where you had feudalism, and that would be fine. That's fine. Or you know, some kind of royal uh, regency situation. So why? Because they are fairy tales. The point is to give another message, not to pay as much attention to the setting itself. They, and that's why a fairy tale is so easily adapted to any era that you would like, because it's the theme. The theme transverses the setting. It's not limited by the setting, nor is it indigenous or linked to the setting, to the historical period or whatever.
Yeah,
That's why, yeah,
Mulan falls into the same kind of a thing as well.
yeah.
And one of the reasons why Pocahontas has become such a point of contention versus, say, for instance, what we were just talking about, 300, is because the indigenous culture that Pocahontas is based off of is related to people who still exist today. Not that there aren't descendants of Persians and ancient Greeks and stuff like that, but people today who are still very much being oppressed by the people in that movie who came over and did that harm. And so and so it's taking these two groups that are still not at peace today, and whose pain is still being felt from these times, and whitewashing it. And that's why it's still contentious right now.
Yeah.
And that's why it's still so problematic. You know, we have Native American women who are one of the biggest groups of people that get missing and get raped and murdered in this country and in Canada, and nothing is done about it, because it's just, there's law enforcement from the outside often cannot really work together with Native officials and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm going into this whole other issue, but I mean, it's just an example of how this division still exists today, and it's still painful, and it still has a negative impact, which is why Pocahontas is contentious and 300 is a bit less so. Whereas 300 just kind of comes off more as silly if you look at it in the lens of being inaccurate.
Yeah.
Mildly racist in some cases, maybe. But
mildly, I like mildly. Oh god. Yeah, for example, and that's a very good point. And I want to illustrate it again with something that isn't really widely known beyond the Balkans, let's say. Okay, so I've been watching a good few YouTube videos where people that are not Greek and not Balkan watch stuff about Greece or geographical, like Geography Now about Greece and stuff like that. And they comment, they give commentary. And one thing that I saw consistently being said, and I took that to be a sincere question, not something that is like a bug or something like that. When it came to who, there is a point of contention between Greece and Turkey about two islands, and actually two islands that are so small that they're basically rocks. Okay, they're not really like island. Don't think of the Cyclades or something like that. And there was such a point of contention that we almost went to war in the 90s over that. And the question that the people ask is like, you have all these thousands for Greece, you have all these thousands of islands. Why don't you just give up those two?
Oh my God.
And yeah, I understand the question because they have no idea of all the history between Greece and Turkey and Greece and Greek people and the Ottomans before that and all of that. They have no idea of the nuance that makes these two rocks extremely important for us and for Turkey. So
I'm wrong in what I was saying before about 300. It is that I should have thought of that. I'm sorry. I mean, obviously Persians, yeah, they were from Turkey basically.
No,
so,
No, they were from Iran.
we're not from Turkey.
Oh shit, you're right. I got it. I'm sorry. My geography is off. Yeah. Never mind.
No, I want to get to a point with what I'm saying. Like, and it would be like tantamount. It could have happened like the Falkland War. Okay, we're talking about a sort of similar situation. It has a different nuance with us, but the idea is, imagine a movie or a cartoon where the two people clash over these two rocks, and then the budding romance between two idiots makes better, and they all have a picnic on the rocks, and that's how they end. Okay, this would infuriate and deeply offend both sides, and they would be right, because this is a wound that is still open, and there are, let's say, tabs that haven't been picked up on other sides. So these things are matters that haven't closed for decades or even centuries. And if you are some kind of person that, and everyone in the Balkans knows that, okay, it's not just like if you are a Balkan person, you will know about this because of other things, or other reasons. I won't go into that. But if you are a non-Balkan person and you come in a cavalier happy fashion to make a story about Greeks versus Turks, for example, or something like that, you're going to piss everyone off. And you're going to give an impression that is completely wrong about reality, exactly because you will not have taken the time to research, to talk to people on both sides. I'm not just saying to just, pick the Greek side or whatever, but research both sides and then make your stance and take the consequences if you like. But the idea is you will be more respected if people see that you have done your work and you display something accurately and not like some, I'm going to say some white guy or not white guy. I mean, some guy that is not part of the in-group that is the Balkans and presumes to think that they can present and represent us in any way that is significant without proper work done.
Yeah, an outsider parachutes in and speaks for you,
Uh,
basically, and tells you,
Yeah.
yeah, this is how you do it. Listen to me. You idiots.
just two things to Turkey, or you Turkey just go back on that blah blah. It doesn't happen that way, and things aren't settled that way. It's not that easy. There's a lot of bad blood that has not been laid to rest, if that can be said about that.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
and often there's hidden things that aren't really apparent. I mean, there's the obvious, cultural stuff and like the unclosed wounds and all that kind of stuff. But there's also modern political and economic realities behind this needing ownership over simple rocks, because simple rocks equal hundreds of miles often of territory for defense and oil energy rights, energy drilling rights, and all that, like airspace. And people don't realize that. Like the Falklands War, your example there, people say, oh, this is miles away, this is thousands of kilometers away from Britain. Why should they bother? Why don't they just give it back to the Falklands? Now, if you'd known a bit of history about the Falklands, you'd know actually they were never owned by the Falklands. Like, that was a territory that was briefly owned by, it was first claimed by British, I think, or French, and then like it was claimed by Britain, briefly claimed by Spain, like for 15 years or something. Never owned by the country of Argentina in all of history. Even before the British came and the French, it was like a barren island. It was never inhabited by people. So that whole idea of, oh, we'll give it back, like is false. Like, so that's historically part of like the British Empire. But be that as it may, it's like Britain didn't want to give it back because they had people living there for, I don't know, like 200 years or something, and it gave them like like strategic control over a certain region of the world. They could like fuel their warships and all that kind of stuff there. But it also is in the period of the Cold War where that invasion, that stuff happened. So that's like strategic control of the world, say, versus where Russia would have influence because Argentina was part of, I think, non-aligned countries. So this was basically the control of the Western world against the Soviet bloc and all that kind of stuff. So there's way more stuff in it than just, General Galtieri versus Margaret Thatcher, So there's history is massively nuanced. It's not just a simple like dick measuring contest like we often think of it. So yeah, it's history is complicated.
Yes.
And same with Greece now.
QUACKCAST.
History is complicated. Okay.
And exactly because it's complicated, you cannot just go willy-nilly and just pick up stuff that you find nice and just play with the things like you play with your Legos or something, and then expect people to accept or like your stuff. Or if you are good enough and you teach people wrong, then you have done a disservice to the people that are directly connected to this thing. And that is, I think, an even worse thing to do if you are a responsible artist and creator, let's say. If you are interested in being constructive and your additions to art to be constructive rather than destructive in culture and society. So
yeah, but I mean, don't be afraid to do your own take on historical things. Like do your own 300 and all that kind of stuff. Just be respectful and don't be a dick about it. try and be respectful and try and use the your historical changes intelligently for a good reason.
Exactly. And also mark it. There's nothing wrong with marking, but this is inspired from this. If you want to see the actual thing research it on your own. This is inspired. This is my vision. This is a take, or whatever. Something that will indicate to the audience that if they want to learn more and actually learn the actual truth about certain things, they should go look for it, which is a very good thing to do. A lot of people have said that they were happy with the movie 300 and stuff, and that made them want to learn more about that particular part of history, and they learned the actual history from that. So there's no reason why something that is historically inaccurate, but respectful enough and marked properly to be a gateway for people to actually learn what has gone on. That happens all the time.
Well, we better wrap it up there because we're going way over time. But yeah, thank you guys for being part of the Drunkduck QUACKCAST. We're QUACKCAST number 481. Baines, Petsy, Tansy, you've all been fantastic. Myself,
It was
Ozzy.
fun. It was a lot of fun.
And I've been here since episode 1.
Okay. Yes, that's historical revisionism. Yes. I think Baines came on about, what, number...
3 weeks ago.
3 weeks ago. About number 50, the 50s or the 60s. So it's a pretty long time. Okay.
A decade.
Maybe even early, like 30s maybe. Could
I think
be.
so. I think it's late 30s or something like that.
Yeah, 1930s. That's when we first started the
Late
QUACKCast.
1930s, yeah. Anyway, nobody cares. Let's go.
Marconi taught us how to do this.
Thanks, guys.
Marconi played the mamba. Listen to your radio.
Oh.
Don't you remember? We built this city. We built this
Bye.
city. Okay.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, let's stop here.
Oh, good week.
He's ahead.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.
We'll be back next week when we come back to kill everybody's fun again.
Yes.
Exactly.
That's right.